We've reached chapter 5 in our reading of Auralia's Colors. Chapter 5 is called The Ale Boy. It is a significant chapter to me because it reminds me of a time when I was just doing my first drafts and beginning to discover the shape of the story of Auralia's Colors. And a friend of mine who was reading some of those early scenes became curious about a character sort of over on the side, just really a practical character. I needed an errand boy character to allow me access to other parts of the geography of this story. And Danny, my friend Danny, asked, uh, might there not be more to this character? I'm curious about him. He doesn't have a name, but I feel like there's more to him than we're seeing in these scenes. And I love a good challenge like that. I love a good what if question. So I began to explore what if there is more to this character than I have yet discovered. And what I discovered led to a much larger vision of this story. I don't know that the Auralia thread would be 4 books long if it weren't for my extra attention to the Ale Boy to discover who he really was and what part he had to play. So this is chapter 5, The Ale Boy, in which he steps forward for the first time. 7 winters spread and deepened the cracks in House Abascar's walls, and the king set workers to mending them with mortar and new stone. Inside, the people grumbled to see such effort invested in a facade when so little attention was paid to their domestic complaints. A wall could not defend their homes against snow, rain, and wind. To make the people understand, King Calmarchus encouraged his officers to share details of their patrols with housefolk. Evidence of beastman activity quite near the house was easy to find, and fearful people were obedient people, striving to ensure that the king cared to protect them. And if the people did not like to see him giving attention to the walls, surely they would disapprove if they learned of his latest endeavor. The king had commanded the Underkeep's miners to embark on an ambitious new mission, to open a tunnel northward, all the way to the river Thronescall. This tunnel would divert water to the Underkeep, power new engines of industry, accelerate their mining, and much more. It was a grand idea, and it was his own. It was a way to begin a new era in Abascar, one that would turn the people's attention away from memories of Queen Geraldine. But he knew that the housefolk were so intent on whatever disrupted their immediate comfort that they had no vision, no grasp of what House Abascar could become. No, the truth would not serve them just yet. The familiar threat of beastmen remained his best persuasion to silence their complaints. Beastmen were not the only frights haunting conversations and furrowing brows in Abascar. As visiting traders spread out their spices, cheeses, dried meats, wind-up toys, cutlery, potions, powders, soaps, and dull weavings, they also spread reports that something mysterious and large had been troubling the waters of Deep Lake. One tale claimed the phantom had stormed down from the north by night, as if a piece of the mountainous forbidding wall had sprouted legs and come hunting with a rabble of north children. Sons and daughters gasped and asked, could it be not a danger at all, but perhaps the keeper, the protector in their dreams, come to their waking world at last? Parents scoffed and said if anything had crawled out of those mountains, it certainly wasn't a friend. A resurgence of superstitions, long suppressed, disgruntled them. This included an age-old rumor that if a traveler spoke of North children, soon afterward, someone near at hand would disappear without a trace. As the fallen leaves darkened and decayed, the blood of the expanse began to freeze. Gatherers bustled about more intently beneath the branches of vine-wound trees, clearing plum spider webs and snatching hordes of winter fruit the spiders had stored. Their thievery did little harm. Plum spiders spent summers digging storehouses for food, and after they prodded fruit and nuts into those burrows, they guarded them with venomous teeth in the autumn. But winter dulled their memories, and they spent the colder months sluggishly creeping about the forest floor, mindlessly searching for their hard-earned feasts. They would hardly miss what the gatherers had taken. And so it was one afternoon, as the laborers felt the lateness of the hour in the aching of their backs, Ursula, the gatherer appointed to watch for beastmen, recognized the staggering gait of someone approaching. She exclaimed in relief, "Somebody better hold Radigan down, 'cause here comes the ale boy." The walking barrel, it seemed a wooden keg with legs, trudged awkwardly into their midst and sat down with the thrum of a hollow drum. The small boy who carried the barrel appeared, a bashful, red-cheeked face under his tousled mop of gold-brown hair. He thrust his arms all the way to his elbows into the pockets of a heavy cloak that would have comfortably fit a boy twice his height. Rakes landed in clanging piles, and shovels were sheathed in the mud as the gatherers huddled, smacking their lips, grinning the grins of children about to make mischief. "What have you got for us this time, boy? Hope there's rum or apple brandy." "Blackberry wine will do me well, takes the chill out of the air." "Surely it is the season for pear cider." The boy looked down at the length of cloak that concealed his feet. "Fill the barrel, please," he murmured meekly. "We'll get to putting apples in that bucket when I say so," said Radigan, a muscular, stubble-bearded brute who worked shirtless and brash in any weather. He elbowed the giant who was working alongside him like a bodyguard, Haggard, the broad-shouldered, whose crazed and wide eyes peeked through a mask of yellow hair. "First," Radigan continued, "you can hand over your stash, or we'll take it ourselves." He and Haggard mustered all powers of intimidation. They were a formidable pair, this young notorious thief and the silent behemoth who followed him everywhere. Radigan's thieving had won him a nickname, the Fox, and 10 years of hard labor besides. Haggard's temper had burdened him with 6 years of the same. Setting roots down in the hard soil of gatherer life, Radigan and Haggard had only grown more thorns. "Radigan, you know the order of things." The patient maternal gatherer who helped keep tempers calm, Nellaby, was elegant, educated, and better mannered than most. "Just because the boy once risked his job to bless us with a drink does not mean he'll do so every time. Don't go abusing him." "I myself don't got no gripe with the boy," blurted Krog, "but Haggard's right. While the stuff we gathered yesterday is warming the guts of Cal Marcus's fat and happy housefolk, my belly wants some fire." There was hearty agreement from the mob, and the ale boy shuffled closer to the barrel as if he might dive inside for refuge. "Fill the barrel, please," he murmured. "You got so many apples in there. Won't take but a minute. Duty officers will come and cart it away soon. Grabbing him by the cloak collar, Haggard brought the boy's tiny nose up to his own bristling beard. Try and scare us with talk of the duty officers? Radigan sneered. Haggard will put something in the bucket, all right. Something about the size of a boy. As Haggard gripped the boy's cloak, that small, frightened face vanished. The boy slipped free of his oversized garment and landed in a heap, wearing only a rumpled brown tunic. Haggard blinked at the empty cloak in his grasp. Radigan stepped in quickly to search the pockets for the little bottles of relief they had hoped the boy would bring. As surprising as a new stream running down a dry path, a song coursed through the trees. Singing was not strange among the gatherers, but this was the wrong song for the moment, and it stilled the riot over the ale boy's belongings. Radigan backed away from the cloak, nearly stumbling over the boy. That's the deep night verse, said Krog, annoyed. But it's only early evening. Who's singing that? All eyes turned to a pair of birch trees that stood arched like a gate. At the base of one of the trees there was a bramble of thistle and vines that unfolded and stood. The leaves shifted and rustled, and suddenly the onlookers discerned a gown of strange and awkward angles, papery with translucent leaves, deep green and purple, sewn together with fronds of broadweed pulled from the river nearby. The edges of this figure blurred like smudged paint, merging with the colors of the forest's wild backdrop. The gatherers recognized the figure's clever face, and murmurs of laughter and discomfort spread. But the ale boy looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Auralia was still small, although she had been among them 15 years now. Against the rich colors of her gown, her silver-brown hair glistened like the edge of a storm cloud, trying to quench the sun. Krog, who usually greeted Auralia with a shout and an embrace, was flustered to have spoken harshly within earshot of the girl. He covered the redness that was rising to his cheeks and edged behind others in the mob. Auralia looked about silently, then smiled as though solving a puzzle. She picked up the rope tie at the top of a lumpish harvest bag, which was twice her size, dragged it to the barrel, loosed its strand, and lifted out a handful of green apples and purple plums. She stood on tiptoe, prodded them over the barrel's edge, and they fell with soft thuds onto the bed of straw at the bottom. Nellaby glared at Radigan, her icy blue stare the only force devastating enough to freeze the roguish burglar where he stood. Then she moved to help Auralia. The season's first snowflakes crept timidly down through the branches while Auralia and Nellaby whispered together and filled the barrel, while the ale boy sat hypnotized by this strange apparition clad in purple and green, while raven calls echoed from the east, rang overhead, and faded into the west. From the moment Auralia arrived, the ale boy was fumbling for his wits. When Auralia spoke, her voice whispered in his ear no matter where she stood. So when she approached him, he felt vulnerable and ashamed. He pulled on his heavy cloak, wishing he could disappear within it. The last apples of the year are always the sweetest. Don't you agree, ale boy? Hard to be patient and let them ripen so purple, but if you do, look at how many they've picked. She drew in air through her nose as if breathing pungent incense. They've stirred 'em up. And now the whole woods smells like wine. The king will be pleased with how hard everybody worked, won't he? Yes, the boy agreed in spite of himself. The gatherers keep the whole house going. Uh-huh. Even Haggard and Radigan began helping. Radigan dragged a bag of apples to the barrel and eyed Auralia suspiciously, as though she were taunting him. But it was clear to the ale boy that she was as innocent as she looked. She sat down on the ground next to him. Through the growing white of the falling snow, he saw her eyes sparkle with affection for this crew of bedraggled souls. You see, that there's Krog. She pointed out the old man passing in front of them with an armful of wild pears. He found me by the river. I love him so. And I made that yellow scarf he's wearing. Krog, you better tuck that scarf into your cloak before any duty officers come along and strangle you with it. Krog ducked behind Big Yawny, then glanced back around the massive man and broke into his famous grin of brown and sideways teeth. Aurelia's eyes were as wide as they would go when she leaned close to the boy, smiled brightly, and winked like a conspirator. Wish I could sneak all of you away and start another house. These folks are buckets of fun compared to the house folk, don't you think? The ale boy nodded. When she said something, he found himself wanting to agree. He reached into his coat and produced from a secret fold a small and clear vial of drink as blue as a summer sky. The king's favorite sweet ale, he whispered. Don't tell anybody I gave you this. He calls it Mountain Capper. And believe me, you don't want to swallow it all at once. She accepted the vial with fingers so cautious and steady it might have been a precious jewel. Like someone melted a quabba bird stone. She looked at him with renewed interest. Not from among the house folk, are you? You're too kindly mannered to be one of them. He felt her fingertips on his forehead, the very place where the mouse scar rested above his right eye. Your eyes have no lashes, and you have no brows. She lowered her voice. Were you in a fire? He turned away. I really should get back. But she did not laugh as others did. It's a beautiful color, your scar, she said. Like plum wine. Like your name written right where all can see. His mouth made a round O, and he stood up, clutching his cloak. My name? He did not understand what was happening to him, why his heart broke open in that moment, why tears stung his eyes. She had unlocked something inside him. Questions rose like water in a well, and he knew if he did not escape, they would pour out of him. So he was quite startled when Auralia stood up, fast and straight, her head tilted askew, bird-like. She became perfectly still, staring through the busyness of the gatherers. When her brow crumpled and she gasped, he felt a sensation like tiny pins pressed against his neck. He started to ask what was wrong, but his breath caught in his throat. She raised her hand. Hush! Nellaby noticed Aurelia's sudden change. She too turned, surveying the trees, wincing in apprehension. Like a goral after a winged predator passes across the sky, she sniffed the air twice. Why isn't Ursula back on the watch? Beastmen, Auralia shouted. They're coming. Get back to the huts. Aw, come now, Auralia. Why do you think? Warney stopped his protest and spun on his heel, his one good eye gazing to the southwest, tracking the shrill and jagged noise of someone in abrupt and terrible pain. Beastmen, roared Haggard, the first word he had spoken all day. He grasped a heavy bough from the tall trunk of a storm-broken tree. They've got Groany, growled Radigan. That sheep skull wandered too far from the harvesting site. Haggard tore the branch free and wielded it as a weapon. Go back home! Go back! He roared, bear-like, at the other gatherers. Back, scum eaters, back to your holes! Hasty now! Haggard's going to teach the beastie a lesson. The ale-boy could not move, paralyzed by a surge of memory. He had once been caught up in a mass of housefolk driven like a herd of sheep. That company of woodcutters had abandoned their stand of pillar trees at the sound of distant warning horns. He had seen no beastmen, but that night, deep in his small den near the Underkeep breweries, had been a dark and sleepless one. The nearness of such savagery had made his world seem more fragile. He had never been more thankful to dwell among the privileged within Abasgar's high stone walls. But now he was unhidden, far from safety. There was no one to organize the scattering gatherers, no one to point them down the best paths, no one to arm them. The threat was close, and the killing, he could hear the death sounds that had sent Auralia to scurry about the clearing. Abasgar's walls were a good hour's travel away. Auralia shoved the gatherers. Go, go, go now! Some reached for their tools, others leapt like rabbits, and a few, like far less graceful creatures, into the brush in hopes they were headed in the right direction. Haggard's courage had burnt up like a dry leaf, and now he was running pell-mell. Krog and Warney paused to fuss over Auralia, but with both hands she picked up the abandoned tree branch club and threatened to give the old man a Haggard-sized beating. When she turned to see the ale-boy transfixed with fear, Auralia dropped the club and dashed to him. You're too small and slow. You're going to need some help. She crouched, lifted her strange green outer cloak over her head, and quickly cast it over the ale-boy. If they come close, hide in the bushes under this cloak. They'll go right by you. But he pushed his head up into the hood. It settled around his shoulders, and he could see again. It was light as air, if a bit too large. But he was not looking at his new disguise. He was staring at Auralia. Shed of her camouflage, Auralia was clad in a cacophonous jumble of colors. She had stitched together gold and greens so bold and bright that it seemed the air had split its seams and burst open, summer reaching into winter. Her shoes were heavy pond pads stitched around her feet with red reeds. He would have kept on staring, but another searing shriek, one that ended with a chilling note, sent his heart thumping. He was sure it would now be too late to meet the one Haggard had called Groany. Are you sure it'll be safe? He asked Auralia. It's how I watch beastmen without being seen. Now get down low in them bushes. Don't let your feet show. Pull the hood over your face. Auralia pressed down on his head and shoulders and kicked him to send him scrambling. The frost had settled into his bones, and it was hard to run. He thrust out his hands and clambered into a depression where rain had run beneath a fallen tree, and then he lay still. At first he thought he heard a heavy boulder rolling across jagged stones. Then he knew it was the snarl of a beastman. He chanced a glance from under the fold of his hood. Engulfed in heavy snowfall, Auralia stood in the clearing as defenseless and resplendent as a sunflower. A hulking darkness stood at the clearing's edge. Steam rose from its bristling shoulders, which were as broad as a bull's. Its eyes were those of a man in a rage, but its bearded jaw lined with yellow teeth was that of a rodent. Blue and bulging veins pulsed along its smooth pink scalp and yellow throat. From shoulders to waist, it resembled a brown fang bear, save for those massive human hands. In one clawed fist, it clutched a club with two sharp metal prongs that dripped gore into the patchy snow. The boy had heard tales of the beastmen, heard that each manifested unique disfigurements from a corruption that confused their bodies into the natures of differing beasts. So it was true. The image would return to him in nightmares. His own nails would turn to blackened claws, feet spreading into black hooves, teeth sharpening, skin thinning into translucence, body slowly hunching forward. The beast seemed momentarily bewildered by the dazzling costume of its prey. Then its pink lips drew back from a wall of fangs. It laughed a spluttering guffaw and dug two ruts in the ground with the prongs of its weapon. Auralia stared back at the monster and spoke something like a quiet incantation. A cough, like a question, burst from its lips. It dropped the club, patted its head, closing its fingers around the shaft of an arrow now buried deep between its eyes. The creature's jaw sagged open. It looked left and right, and then its knees buckled. It crumpled into a heap upon the spiked club, which burst its lungs with a gurgling wheeze. Shaking the earth, 6 giant vaughns leapt over the fallen tree and the concealed boy. They hissed and stamped at the snow-dampened soil, and their armored riders shouted with confidence, circling the steaming beast-man corpse. One of the soldiers, red-bearded and tall, fired another arrow from a caster into the beast-man's back. The creature rocked with a spasm and then was still. The aleboy felt a surge of relief when he recognized one of them by his stature and his unsheathed sword, Captain Arkrobin. But he did not call out or lift his hood. Despite the captain's famous strength, his mercurial demeanor always unsettled the boy. The men exchanged hushed words, their attention drawn by the brightly costumed young woman in their midst. His fear did not leave, but it changed. Would Auralia survive a beastman attack, only to be beaten by soldiers from Abiskar? Arkrobin laughed suddenly and spurred his vaughn to approach her. You again, so is this what you do when you stir up a nest of beastmen? You lead them here to kill Abiskar's gatherers? I should drag you in for questioning. Auralia did not flinch when the vaughn's snout shoved at her. Who is this? Asked the red-bearded archer, who had already strapped another arrow to his caster in case of another threat. Arkrobin hesitated. A trespasser. Someone I should have stuffed in a sack and tossed in the throne skull when I found her stealing from our woods. The captain narrowed his eyes and addressed Auralia. Do you want to introduce yourself to Tabor Jan? He might know your name. He's heard about the impudent little weaver who brings the gatherers forbidden things, and he'll be seeing you again soon enough. If my count is correct, you're about 100 days from your test at the rites of the privilege. Another rider drew up between Arkrobin and Tabor Jan. The aleboy gasped, recognizing the yellow sign emblazoned on the soldier's shield. Ride back home, Calraven, said Arkrobin. This isn't proper work for a prince. We'll check around for more beastmen. That dying gatherer made such a noise he might have attracted others. Is this the girl? Prince Calraven whispered. Is this the one I've tried for so long to catch? Auralia faced them with the same readiness she had shown the beastman. I've looked for you, young woman, Calraven continued, much to Arkrobin's annoyance. Why do you always run from me? Auralia looked at her toes, which were reddening on the freezing ground. It's extraordinary, what you're wearing, said the prince. Illegal, but beautiful. How do you make such fantastic colors? I don't make 'em, she said, and the ale boy wondered if the prince could hear her. And they're not hard to find. The prince nodded. Ark Robin told me you would be difficult, but I'm not finished with you yet. I'll find you again when this ugly business with beastmen is finished. He turned his Vaughn, reached to deliver a congratulatory clap to the archer's shoulder, and all the riders but Ark Robin charged off into the trees. Auralia stepped back to avoid the beastman's blood, which spread like syrup across the frozen ground. Ark Robin wagged his finger like a disgruntled teacher. How do you feel about coming to live with us inside the walls now? Think you could give up this foolishness in order to enjoy some protection? We don't always come to the rescue. There's worse dangers than beastmen, she quietly replied. Besides, I would have been safe. I already called for help of my own. Ha! Your friend the Fangbear, I suppose. Ark Robin prompted his Vaughn to prance around her, kicking up a storm of dirt and slush. Spoken like a true child of the North, the country from which nothing good can come. Never said I was a North child, she replied with menace in her voice. I just told you I remembered being there. You cast a shadow like the rest of us, sure, but you've walked where trouble comes from, and so you bring it with you. Take it back, I say. He pointed his sword northward. Get yourself gone. You talk like you've seen a North child, Auralia said with sudden intensity. Ark Robin scowled, spat, and surrendered, departing in a rush, a few swinging branches, the only evidence of his passage. Auralia knelt before the fallen beast-man. She combed tangles of its deep brown beard, then sharply jerked free a few strands and tucked them into a pocket. Prying the beast-man's massive prong club free with both hands, she then turned, smiled in the ale-boy's direction, and stepped back into the birch gate through which she had come. The ale-boy thought to call after her, to remind her of her cloak, but something between his mind and voice remained paralyzed. His strewn thoughts realigned in the weary quiet of the clearing. His hands, which had been pressed against the fever in his face, came free and caught a stream of sliding snowflakes. The snow melted there into a small mirror. He watched the faint and wavering reflection of his scar. She had called it beautiful. A tremor, a rain of snowy leaves. Even the earth, it seemed, was shuddering at what had taken place. Then it shook again. The ale boy looked intently into the trees. Help of her own, he said to his quivering reflection. She called for help of her own. As the third thunderous footfall shook the ground, he fled, unable to make room for yet another mystery. Not today.